All right, well, let's go on and get started here. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Today's April 19th, and I am excited to welcome our first international presenter. Please welcome Jess Torpey, Senior Meteorologist at Uniper Global Commodities, joining us from Dusseldorf, Germany. Jess, good afternoon to you. I will let you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back at my alma mater giving a discussion here. We're going to talk a little bit about weather maps, and then I'm going to work you through the day in the life of a European energy meteorologist. But I thought it was appropriate to start with a word about the man who is the inspiration for this discussion, and that's Ken Reeves. I was actually fortunate enough to work with Ken at AccuWeather from 1996 to 1997. And he was just a very pleasant guy to work with. He always had such an upbeat attitude. He was such a hard worker, and he was really great at what he did. And he was really a great ambassador for AccuWeather. And he always encouraged everybody to do their best and give their best. And even a few times after I left AccuWeather, I crossed paths with him at meetings and so forth. And he always remembered who I was, and we had some nice chats. His passing in 2012, it's hard to believe that's so long ago now. It was really a loss for our whole profession. And I can't tell you what a privilege it is to do this today in his memory. So there's that picture of him from their YouTube tribute from AccuWeather, and that's exactly how I remember him. He was, even these computers were pretty much what we were using back in the late 90s there at AccuWeather. So here's to Ken, I guess we'll say. Let me tell you a little bit about myself before I get into this. I was at Penn State from 1993 to 1997. But I didn't get the diploma until 1999, and that's thanks to differential equations, which is the only course I could not pass. I finally did in 1999, and when they mailed me that diploma, it was the greatest thing ever. My first paid Met job was actually the weather forecaster for the Collegian. If you take any Collegian from 1996 or 1997, and you look in the upper right corner, my name was there along with a weather forecast. That's how we used to do it back then. And they paid $50 a month, and that went pretty far at Cafe 210 West. I hope I'm not dating myself, and that place still exists because it was a good time to just sit out there and have a drink. I was an intern at AccuWeather in 96 and 97, as I mentioned, and that was a great introduction to meteorology on the commercial side. I wrote for the Washington Post. I did the New York Daily News, and we were briefing television forecasters all over the country. I was helping with radio broadcasts and so forth. It was an awesome experience. I decided in 1997 to jump ship and go into the television realm because the National Weather Service wasn't hiring, and it just was not, there were not a lot of commercial jobs available back then. So I ended up spending 10 years on TV. Utica, New York is where I started. Rochester, New York was one of my television markets. And then I finished my TV career in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, which was at that point the 25th largest television market in the country. And it was an interesting place to do weather. It was a lot of different weather there, from hurricanes to snow and everything else. In 2007, I moved to the energy side. I started with Exelon Generation, and I was in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. I lived in that area, southeastern Pennsylvania, for about 4 or 5 years. Then I made the move to Freepoint Commodities in 2011, which was kind of a trading shop in Greenwich, Connecticut. But from January 2014 to the present, I've been senior meteorologist for Eon Global Commodities, and now it's spin-off Uniper Global Commodities in Dusseldorf, Germany. And you just never know where your Penn State education is going to take you. I certainly didn't finish in 1997 or actually 99 with the diff EQ, thinking that I was going to end up living in Germany for so many years. But it's been an awesome experience, and I've really enjoyed every minute of it. In the end, energy meteorologists, we're basically a giant insurance policy for companies. And I want to give you an example from this year, February 2nd, with the US report that I prepare remotely here from Germany and send to the Americans. We were looking at historical matches to the 6 to 10 day pattern running off of the Euro ensemble run on the hemispheric scale. And this was weighted toward the US and Pacific look. And it was really getting interesting with that. When you took this pattern and rolled it forward to an 11 to 15 using some of the tools available from one of the commercial vendors, Commodity Weather Group, run by Matt Rogers, who's also a Penn Stater. It was really showing a significant cold outbreak that stretched all the way from Alaska straight down to Texas and the Gulf of Mexico. And at that point, we were really starting to raise some red flags, warning our traders in Texas that some very anomalously cold weather was on the way. And of course, we all know what ended up happening there. This was how things looked as an 11 to 15 prediction using that methodology. And then this was the actual outturn on the right. It was a lot of hand-holding between when we started talking about this at the very beginning of February and when the delivery came, because not all the models were uniform and consistently showing the same things. There was a lot of back and forth. Texas was out of it, the South was out of it, but we held our guns, and as a consequence, we were not one of the companies that took a big financial hit from the situation that occurred there. In fact, we did quite well, and part of that was being prepared and making sure that the traders were very well informed as to what the possibilities were, which is a massive part of what this job's all about. But odds are you've never had very much interaction with a European energy meteorologist, so I figured I'd walk you through what a typical day is like for me, and you just never know what's going to pop up. Sometimes in April, you end up with a typhoon east of the Philippines, and it ends up being the strongest typhoon on record in the month of April. Why would we talk about this? Well, it's not going to hit any land. It's going to steer clear of the Philippines. It may graze a few islands in the Western Pacific. But something like this intense and this soon in the season, that's so anomalous, even this far away from the US and from Europe, it can have hemispheric implications on global model performance. I've seen it happen many times before. And oftentimes you'll see multiple typhoons or hurricanes before you start to have problems. And I realized that Japan's not in the right place. I moved this at the last minute. I forgot to move the label, but I definitely know that this is Japan. But anyway, you know in the back of your mind as an energy met that something this bizarre that's happening this soon in the season at this strength, it can really play tricks with especially operational runs of computer models going forward. So over the next 5 to 7 days, I fully anticipate to see some craziness with the models on a global scale. And I mean, after all, this is a map discussion, so we can talk about things that are going on globally. This is how I like to start. I like to go through all the models and then pick out the ones that I like best. And I start always on the global scale. And you can see that there's the typhoon to the east of the Philippines, but there's a whole lot going on in this weather map. And, and when you take a look at it on a hemispheric scale, suddenly you're centered right here at the North Pole. Here's the US, here's Europe, here's Asia. What really draws your eye is how diverse the polar vortex is. It's all over the place. And you have big rises in the jet stream. One of them is right over Scandinavia at the moment. There's another massive rise over the western part of North America. And big troughs corresponding to this too. I mean, one of which is setting up over a good chunk of Canada. And as a result, as we get into the first day part here, we have quite a big trough that's keeping temperatures on the colder side for a lot of the states. But always, I think it's smart to start big and work your way smaller. And what we end up with is a very easy to detect trough and ridge pattern here over North America. And when you advance to hour 180, that's April 26th. The typhoon's not there anymore in the Pacific, but we still have a lot of diversity with the pattern here. And we have a considerable trough that's set up over portions of the far eastern Pacific, one here just off of the Japanese coast and the Siberian coast. And then you have a very large jet stream ridge that's poking up here in the North Atlantic between the US and Europe. Um, Again, very easy to find this when you look at the hemispheric scale, that this Atlantic ridge is something that's going to be influential both in the northeastern US and for portions of Europe. But with an American zoom in, you can see that there's strong low pressure near the Canadian Maritimes, the rotating flow back in that, keeping it cool in New England and in New York State, interior Northeast, but a pretty strong high pressure system here, and that's extending all the way down to the Gulf. But a notable rise in the jet stream coming in the central part of the country, and much warmer flow setting up for places like Texas in the south. And again, zooming in, start big and smaller. It's pretty clear to see where the ridges and troughs are. And then we get to hour 336. So this would be Sunday, May 2nd. A lot of high pressure showing up across the Pacific, a lot of high pressure showing up across the Atlantic too, and a relatively flat flow. You don't see the diversity of the polar vortex as much, more of a consolidation of that feature. And as a consequence, across North America, a pretty flat flow pattern. Nothing that's atypical, and a lot of Pacific air rushing into the equation here. So suddenly you're not ending up with a giant trough with low temperatures over a good chunk of the populated portion of the US outside of the West Coast as we have initially. And it's a lot of Pacific air that's neither cold nor warm, and really lacking extremes. But yeah, I want to show you what my day is like at 6:30 in the morning. You know, there's an assumption that we're going to be looking at data from at least 6 o'clock onward. I can tell you that I'm somebody that's looking at it before I go to bed, when I wake up. It's very easy to check data anymore with everything available on your phone and iPad and everything else. But we have an all hands call at 6:30. It's with two other meteorologists that I work with here, and we've just added a third, and she'll be joining us from the UK at the beginning of next month. So then I will prepare a morning slideshow for our gas team, which is who I primarily support. And I present that at the market open in Europe at 9 a.m., which is 3 o'clock in the morning stateside. UK temperature forecast is something that I handle and send out, and a discussion for them as well. Of course, we monitor new model data that comes in. And for Europe, that's between 5:30 in the morning and 9:45 in the morning is when almost everything is through. I send out a one-pager product. I'm going to show you a lot of examples of what these look like here, but this is just kind of the text version of it. I have a daily call with our London trading team and our lead trader that's headquartered there. We send out a global model wrap-up showing clusterized data and risks for all of the key consumption areas of the world. I send out a morning wrap-up between 11 and 11:30. And then my focus shifts to North America. I do support our traders in Calgary, in Houston, and in Chicago, right here from Dusseldorf. And I usually send them a slide pack that's issued by no later than about 1:15, 1:30-ish here in Germany, which would be available to them for when they walk in the door, Central Time. Then I participate in their all hands call, which is at 2:50 in the afternoon here, 7:50 in the morning, Chicago and Houston time. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool to lead morning meetings on two continents. And sometimes I get calls from Asia too, because we have offices in Dubai and Singapore. And we might have an office in Tokyo soon. We just started trading Japanese power. So it's never boring. There's always something to talk about in one of these regions. On Tuesday and Friday, I'll send out kind of an international renewables grid, which I was challenged by one of our traders to come up with, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. And I kind of give kind of some headlines as to some extreme weather that's happening around the globe. And Wednesdays, I also support our LNG team, and I send them a comprehensive wrap-up of what's going on, everything from Brazilian and Chinese inflows with hydro to temperatures, expectations in the tropics that may impact things, and even sea ice, because now you can move LNG from Russia to the Far East um, using a northern route during the summertime because the ice thins out enough. But the first thing that I'll look at is weather data. I show an example here of the clusterized product that we have from one of our vendors that takes the members of the GFS and the Euro ensemble and then clusterizes them as a risk assessment going forward. So this is the day 9 prediction using that product. And what we like at that point is that Atlantic ridge and a corresponding trough across Europe with some cool temperatures. I mean, cool is a relative term in late April. If this was the kind of pattern that had set up in December, January, or February, it would really be interesting because we'd have sky high demand. But demand is elevated now in terms of gas usage and power usage because people are keeping the heat on longer than they typically would. Again, a lot of the focus that I have is on the UK. So we do wind predictions, which gives an output based off of each individual model run as a curve, taking the wind expectation, and then this vendor breaks it down into what the output would be in gigawatt hours. Same for PV, which is solar. Really interesting stuff. I mean, Europeans are not too used to looking at maps, and they prefer looking at graphs, which was a bit of a steep learning curve for me coming from the US side, which is the opposite is true. And temperatures can be a driver. I mean, with the UK temperatures expected to be below normal and with below normal wind, that's a pretty potent combination even in April, even as these normal temperatures rise by 0.8 Celsius a week or so for the UK. It's something that's very important, and especially true in the winter months. We can break it down more by model as well. You have the interpretations of the Euro as the blue line and the GFS as the red line, with wind predictions out to 10 days for both the UK and for Germany. I have some examples here, and these are the solar curves for both countries. Very important in trying to figure out what percentage of demand is going to be met by renewables. And I have this example. So this is the German demand expectation based off of weather and day of the week. And there's a whole host of things that go into a prediction like this. If the models are correct, and on Thursday, we end up with 32 gig of wind in Germany, and we end up with 21 gig of solar output, 72% of German power demand would be met by these two renewables, which means that people that operate the grid would have to keep really close tabs on how well the grid is handling that much renewable power at any given moment, because you always have to have something there to back it up, because you never want to end up with a blackout because the renewables are going back and forth. But this would displace gas usage. It could influence whether or not nuclear reactors are going to be going that day, how much coal would be burned. It really is fascinating when you think about it. And just to give you some perspective on the left here, some things you might not know. I mean, Norway, 95% of their electricity demand can be met by hydro. In France, 70% of theirs can be from nuclear. It's one of the largest nuclear countries in the world. But for Germany, the main primary power source is wind, believe it or not. And you can see that broken down here in 2020, 27% of all power demand was met by wind generation in Germany. But natural gas is kind of the default base load. It's becoming that, the kind of the thing that wouldn't be influenced by no wind or no incoming solar radiation. That's about 12%, and that's something that's heavily impacted by weather, because if it's really cold, there's going to be a lot of gas used to heat homes. Of course, wind and solar output will be almost 100% correlation with what the weather's going to do that day. And hydro, of course, I don't need to explain that that's something also that's heavily impacted by weather. So 53.7% of the electricity that was generated in 2020 had something to do with weather or was heavily impacted by weather. So, we don't just look at Europe here, because in this day and age, we have liquefied natural gas, LNG, which can move from Qatar to anywhere in the world. It can move from the United States to Asia to Europe. It goes from Russia to the Far East to Europe. It can go to Brazil. It can go to any place anymore. So you have to know what's happening in the big consumption areas, which are Europe, which are Eastern Asia, and which are the United States. So every day, this would be one of the first things I would post on our team's chat, and just to give them some broad overview of what's expected. So you see the anomalously cool weather across the US in the first day part, but really the US becomes a lot less interesting in the 6 to 10 and 11 to 15 day part. So it's kind of the norm in the energy side to break things down by 5-day periods. Europe becomes the most interesting in the 6 to 10, because a lot of Northern Europe has below normal temperatures. And then China, this is a massive, massive energy user. Their temperatures start to decline, but in early May, cool weather actually is not a bullish signal there, or if it is, it's not for much longer, because all this would do would be prevent people from putting air conditioners on. It wouldn't necessarily be a situation where people in China would be rushing to turn on the heat because of temperatures like this. So there's a seasonal component to all this as well. And of course, the job that pays my bills is getting the European forecast right. So I put all of the ensemble data visible to our guys, just to give them some kind of risk assessment. And in the 1 to 5, I kind of put my twist on this. It's normal to slightly below this day part. These are the lowest temperatures in the 6 to 10 day window, which is the 24th to the 29th. This was the one that I happen to like. And then nothing is as cool as its 6 to 10 version as an 11 to 15 day prediction, which would be April 29th to May 4th. But at the same time, I wanted to stress that there's no extensive warming that happens either in much of our key business area, although there's a nice moderation from Italy down toward Turkey. And sometimes they'll want to see even more. So, we have 24 hours worth of the 11 to 15 day part. This is current. I don't want to hide anything from the people that I support. So I'll just lay all the cards out there and say, well, I looked at everything, and this is what I think is what's going to happen. So they can take it or leave it, and they can trade off of this model if they decide, or they can trade off of any of these. It's up to them. I'm not the one that pushes the button. I'm just the analyst that's there to provide them with the guidance and the expertise on the weather side. At 8:39 this morning, I sent this UK weather brief out, which has the temperatures that we expect to see by day and by night. And this shows what our forecast is as a green line, the previous from Friday, and the kind of the orange and the blue lines are the GFS and Euro ensemble models. You can see that the temperatures definitely came in lower than our expectation over the course of the weekend, but not anything terribly extreme, especially from this weekend onward there. Low temperatures in the low single number Celsius and in the low double digits. For high temperatures Celsius, that's below normal, yes, but it's not freezing cold. So I would discuss that here, and I'll give my spin on wind and solar generation, and then show what the models are showing as well. This is a well-received product. It gives you temperatures, precipitation outlook, wind forecast, and solar generation for all of our key business areas as a 6 to 10 and 11 to 15. It's meant to be kind of a unifying product in case somebody wants to know, I'm trading Germany, but what's it going to be like in France? Is there going to be a lot of wind? That was the original intent of this product, but there's some people that this is the only thing they look at on the weather side, which is fine too, because one way or another, we want to get our message out to them. And each one of these colored boxes represents our confidence in what the forecast is and what our prediction is relative to normal. So you can see that we have a pretty cool prediction overall for Europe, with not a lot of wind unless you're looking at the Spanish situation. Sorry, Spain wind is on the lower side, but it would be a wetter outturn for Spain than for some other areas of Europe. And sometimes they want to see what the risk assessment is, and we can use the clusterized data. This is something that we also get from Commodity Weather Group. It takes the 103 members of the European ensemble, which is 51, plus the GFS, which is 31 members now, and the Canadian, the CMC model, which is 21, and then it kind of lumps them into what the risks are, not just with temperature, but will also show precipitation. And it gives you an idea of what the possibilities are. And there is a somewhat cool forecast, and 7 out of 10 members are going in that direction in the 11 to 15. So as a quick reference product, that's pretty decent. Same for Europe. I mean, it's pretty clear to see that the 6 to 10 is the coolest when you compare all these day parts. It's pretty quick reference, and the coolest area is probably going to be in Northeastern Europe if this data verifies. And the US picture as well. Very clear to see that it's a lot of cool temperatures initially, and then moderation with the overwhelming majority of the data, other than a quarter of the members here and 18% here, some increase in temperature as week 2 progresses. Precipitation, of course, I talked about how in Scandinavia, 90 to 95% of all of their electricity demand can be met by hydro. So if they have poor incoming rainfall or snowfall there, it can have implications throughout the year. But there's hydro generation that occurs in other places as well. Spain has a decent amount coming out of the Pyrenees, the Alps. This is an area where there's a lot of hydro focused, and so is the Balkan region of Southeastern Europe. And just to give you an indication what the numbers are, I mean, you wouldn't think of Turkey as a hydrological powerhouse, but they have a lot installed, 28 gigawatt of installed capacity on the hydro side. And even some places like Portugal, you might not think of, a very small country, but a lot of their power can be met by hydro if there's enough water available. Then you look at some of the installed capacities on a global scale, and you realize that Germany, a country that's the size of Montana, has the 3rd most installed wind of any country in the world. Everybody's dwarfed by China because they have 237 gigawatt installed of wind power capacity. Not all of that's connected to the grid, but it's an impressive number. And the US as a whole is now up to 105. But Germany's right there. The UK's in 5th, in 6th place rather. Spain's in 5th. There's all these niche things that you have to keep an eye on and know in the back of your mind that this can be influential to gas prices or power prices. And on the solar side as well, China dwarfs everybody. US is in 2nd place. Japan has 63 gig. I mean, area-wise, Japan's not a very big country, but they have a lot of solar panels. And so does Germany now, almost 50 gig installed. More than India, some of these other huge countries. Australia, obviously, could be a massive solar powerhouse if they wanted to. The problem is they don't have a very big population. So I was challenged by one of my traders who said, we would like to know pretty far out for LNG purposes what the risks are in terms of renewables on a global scale. So he challenged me to do Chinese hydro, which is not something that's really readily available from a lot of vendors or sources. Chinese wind output, some niche stuff here too, like Turkish hydro, Brazilian hydro. They're at almost an 8-year hydro balance minimum at this point, and they're using a lot of LNG and other sources to generate power, which would otherwise be met by hydro demand. So yeah, it was a real challenge to put something like this together, but we do this 2 times a week, correlating with the output of the European weekly product, which is generated Monday night and Thursday night. That's published. By the end of the morning, I'm sending out my twist on things, and I'll do it in bullet points. I know people don't have a lot of time to read things. I don't write books. I write bullet points, and I use a lot of pictures. So I'll kind of wrap things up on how I see things going. We do seasonal prediction as well. Our December forecast was spot on. Our January forecast for Europe was pretty lousy. But in February, this was our overall expectation, but we had also this risk of high pressure emerging in the north that could cool things off significantly. So our B scenario went out there. So we didn't do too bad with the map prediction, but on a heating degree day scale, which is one way you can use to measure what demand might be on the gas side, our error was very, very small, which was something that was I was fortunate with, since I take the lead on that product. But that's a thankless job, seasonal. I mean, if you're wrong, sometimes they'll hold your feet to the fire. If you're right, you often don't hear anything about it. So it's a challenge. I always like to take it up, but it's kind of thankless. And then you never know on any given day what somebody might hear or see on Twitter, LinkedIn, from brokers that are talking about things, from different vendor reports. There was one day where there was so much chatter about so many fringe things, from strato warming to sea ice to the MJO to some of the teleconnection. The La Nina and El Nino were thrown in there. I just put this grid together and threw it out. You really have to be ready to call an audible. When you do what I do, you can't just expect everything's going to be linear and you just give your opinion and give it out and send it out there. You never know who's going to hear what. And if you're not prepared with anticipating what they might be hearing ahead of time, it can make you look pretty bad. So as a consequence, I have a million tabs open at the top of my windows when I open them up. Of course, we talk about teleconnections too, and I just gave you one example of how I do it. The North Atlantic Oscillation is a big one for Europe, in particular for Northwest Europe and the UK and Norway. I don't just throw it out there and say, well, here's the NAO, and it's the negative prediction, and it's lower than it was Friday morning. I always put what the consequences are on a global scale. And you can find this information from different weather sources. This one, in fact, is from World Climate Service, which is headquartered right there in State College. With a negative NAO this time of year, you'd expect cool weather in the US and also cool weather in Northern Europe. I don't want to just throw these things out there and just have people guessing what that actually means. So I'll break it down by the consequences of these things as well. And I guess I'll just leave it with the fact that I'm always glad to help Penn Staters. It's always great to hear from people. My email address is jesstorpey@gmail.com. And I'll open up the door if you have any questions now, or, like I said, feel free to reach out to me at any time. If I can help you in setting your path on a career or explain more about energy, meteorology, or even television, and I did that for a decade, I'm always happy to do so. So thank you very much.
Jess, thank you very much for that fantastic presentation. It's really interesting to get a little bit of a global perspective on things.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions that you'd like to ask of Jess, or any, whether related to his job or related to things happening internationally, the chat is open. The Q&A is available. Jess, you are still screen sharing, so if you push your cursor to the top of the screen, you'll find a little green bar. If you hover over that and then click
Stop
on
share.
Oh, well, that works too. And
All
then
right.
in that case, chat will be at the bottom of your screen. There's a button for it.
All right, perfect. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really didn't know what to do for this, whether it was kind of a Pennsylvania focus map discussion. I figured there weren't too many people talking about European renewables on these meetings, so I figured I'd take it in a different direction.
I for one am all down for that. We try to bring in people from all across the meteorology industry, because different folks have different strokes and know different things and have all their individual perspectives. So this was a real treat getting to see things from a European standpoint.
Sure, makes good sense.
Open up the Q&A. Nothing there. Okay. Quiet group this week.
Cool. Well, it was a pleasure. And, like I said, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always eager to meet new people and talk weather. And if I can be any help in advancing somebody's career or so forth, it would be a real joy to do that from my end.
And to those of you attending, I just put Jess's email in the chat if you would like to copy that. He had it up on his slides, but Zoom doesn't currently allow you to copy directly off someone's screen share. So, all right. Well,
we're all at Microsoft Teams, so we're remote here. I've been here since March 20th in my extra bedroom in my house doing this remotely. It's a challenge. I know it's a challenge for all you guys as students as well in this kind of environment, but I wish you all the best and hope this wraps up pretty shortly, this pandemic.
Thank you. You said this was your first time using Zoom, right?
First time using Zoom, but it's not too different from Microsoft Teams, which is what we have here. So
I had been noticing some articles here and there that Teams and Zoom were starting to share some features.
Yeah, a lot of it looked familiar, so that was a good thing.
All right, well, if there are no questions or comments or anything to that effect, Jess, I believe we can go our separate ways. Thank you again for this week's presentation.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're most certainly welcome.
Best from Germany. So long.
Join us next week as we will have AccuWeather meteorologist Nicole Labiondo, who may remember she presented one last week. She will be joining us at the same time, same place, 10:15 a.m. Eastern. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week, everybody.